Hey, welcome! Have you ever really wondered what's going on behind the scenes at your favorite coffee shop or, some big tech company? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain and dive into the secret language of business, the economics of production and cost that drive every single decision they make.
Seriously, think about it. We've all been there, right? A restaurant is totally packed, there's a huge line, and you're just thinking, man, they could make so much more money if they just hired one more person. So is it just bad management, or is there something deeper, something economic going on here? Let's find out.
Okay, let's just get right into it. When it comes down to it, pretty much every business, from a giant corporation to that little food truck on the corner, has one main goal. They want to maximize their profits. It's the engine that makes the whole thing run.
And the formula for profit looks super simple on the surface. It's just your total revenue, that's all the money coming in, minus your total cost, all the money going out. Easy, right? Well, that total cost part is where things get really, really interesting.
You see, when an economist talks about cost, they mean something totally different than what an accountant means. And this leads to two completely different ways of looking at profit. Understanding this difference is absolutely key to figuring out how businesses actually think.
So it all boils down to two types of costs. First, you have explicit costs. These are the obvious ones, the money you literally pay out for stuff like wages, rent, and materials. But then you have implicit costs. These are the hidden opportunity costs. Think about it like this. If you're running your own business, a huge implicit cost is the salary you could have been earning if you just went and worked for somebody else. You don't write a check for it, but it's a very real cost of your decision.
And that brings us to the two types of profit. An accountant, they calculate profit by subtracting only those explicit, out-of-pocket costs from revenue. But an economist, they subtract both the explicit and those hidden implicit costs. This means economic profit is almost always going to be lower than accounting profit because it takes into account the full picture of what you're giving up to run your business.
And this is where you can see why both are so important. Accounting profit is crucial. You need it for paying taxes and showing investors how you're doing. But economic profit? Man, that answers a much bigger question. Is this business actually the best use of my time and my money? I mean, if your economic profit is zero or even negative, it's a huge red flag that you could be making more money doing something else. That's why it's used for those giant make or break decisions.
All right, so we've got a handle on how we measure cost. But to really get it, we have to look at the production side of things. How does a business decide how many people to hire or how many machines to buy? Well, that decision is governed by this fundamental law of production.
Every single business operates with what's called a production function. It sounds super technical, but it's basically just a recipe. It tells you, hey, if I put in this much labor and this many machines and this much material, I'm going to get that much finished product out the other end. It's the firm's blueprint for making stuff.
Okay, let's look at a real example here. This table shows a farm, and they've got a fixed amount of land. Now watch what happens as they add workers. The first worker, they produce 18 units. Good start. The second worker adds 19 more. The third adds 20. Things are rocking. But then, wait a minute, the fourth worker only adds 19, and the fifth only adds 18. Something's definitely changing here.
And what's happening is a classic concept called the law of diminishing returns. You can see it perfectly on this graph. At the beginning, adding more workers leads to huge gains in productivity. But eventually, you hit this point where each new worker adds less and less to the total output. It's literally the too many cooks in the kitchen problem. People start getting in each other's way, and the productivity per person just drops. So that pizza place we talked about, they've done the math. They know that hiring a fifth person would cost them more in salary than the extra pizzas that person could help make. That's the law of diminishing returns in action.
So, we've seen how production starts to get less efficient after a certain point. Now let's connect that directly to the money. How does that too many cooks problem actually affect the cost of making each and every pizza? To see that, we've got to look at what I like to call a firm's cost dashboard.
First off, we need to split total cost into two big buckets. You've got fixed costs, think of the rent on the building. You pay the same amount whether you make one pizza or 1,000. Then you have variable costs. These change depending on how much you produce, like the cost of dough, cheese, and the wages for your pizza makers. The more you make, the more you spend here.
And now let's meet the superstar of cost analysis, marginal cost. This is, without a doubt, the single most important number for any firm that's trying to make a decision. It answers one simple question. How much, exactly, will it cost me to produce just one more item? That number is the key to everything.
Okay, I know this graph looks a little intimidating, but just hang with me. Let's just focus on two key lines here. The U-shaped blue line, that's your average total cost, basically what it costs to make a typical unit. And that red swooping line, that's our hero, marginal cost. That's the cost of making just the next one. And believe me, the relationship between these two is where all the magic happens.
The way marginal cost and average total cost interact is just like your grade point average. Think about it. If your score on the next test, your marginal grade, is lower than your overall average, it's going to pull your average down, right? If it's higher, it pulls it up. It's exactly the same here. As long as the marginal cost of making one more pizza is below the average, that average keeps falling. But the second that marginal cost curve crosses the average total cost curve, which happens right at its lowest point, the cost of the next pizza starts pulling the average back up. And that intersection, that is the sweet spot. That's the efficient scale, where the business is producing at the absolute lowest possible cost per unit.
So far, everything we've talked about is about decisions a firm can make, right now, with the factory and the equipment they already have. But what happens when they have time to plan for the future? Well, that's the crucial difference between the short run and the long run. And here's a key point. It's not about a specific amount of time, like a month or a year. The short run is any period where at least one of your inputs is fixed. You're stuck with the size of the kitchen you've got. The long run, on the other hand, is the time horizon where everything is on the table. You can build a bigger kitchen, buy all new ovens, anything you want. Everything is variable. Now this slide here shows how it all fits together. That big sweeping curve is the long-run average cost curve. You can think of it like an envelope that wraps around all the possible short-run options. It's like a roadmap that shows a company the most efficient factory size to build for whatever amount of output they want to target in the future.
Now, on the downward sloping part of that long-run curve, you see something amazing: economies of scale. This is the superpower that big companies have. As they get bigger, they can have workers specialize, they can buy materials in huge bulk discounts, and they can use more efficient mass production techniques. All of this drives their average cost per unit way, way down.
But bigger isn't always better. If a firm gets too big, it can hit the other side of the curve, diseconomies of scale. This is where the company just becomes a huge bureaucratic monster. Communication breaks down, coordinating all the different departments becomes a nightmare, and the average cost per unit actually starts to go up. It just becomes too complex to manage efficiently.
So, there you have it. From a super simple profit formula all the way to the complexities of long-run planning, we've seen the hidden economic logic that shapes the entire business world. It's just a constant balancing act. And that leaves us with one last thought. We've been talking about businesses, but what about you? What are the hidden opportunity costs, the paths not taken, in your own big life and career decisions? Definitely something to think about.